All right, thanks.
I think we'll go ahead and get started. I've got 12:01. Want to thank you all for participating today on our, as we call them now, monthly Forage Livestock Town Halls. And again, we're doing these, I think, on the second Thursday of each month. I hope you all got some welcomed rain over the last week or so. We were very blessed here in Northwest Missouri and got some really nice rains. Has slowed down harvest, but I think most everybody was willing to give that up to get the rain we got. We were getting pretty dry. So with our program today, we have our weather report, which we'll start off here in a little bit with Pat Guinan. Then we do have a question of the week, which Dr. Eric Bailey is going to go over with us. And then Mark Green, who was with NRCS, is going to talk about some fencing and water challenges with regards to grazing crop residues. So with that, also, if you haven't ever participated on a Zoom call, there is the chat section at the bottom where you can ask questions or you can speak up if you need to. Also, if you want to just send that question anonymously, you can send it to Jill Scheit, who has changed her name to Ask Questions Here, and she'll be the only one seeing it, and then she can bring it up when questions are being asked for. So however you want to do it, we're very open to however it works for you. So I think we'll go ahead and get started with today's program. Mr. Pat Guinan, are you ready, sir?
I am. Yep. Sounds good. Thank you, Jim, and good afternoon, everyone. Well, it's been about a month since we last met, and September is over. We rolled into October, and the warm temperatures we saw last month have continued for the first 2 weeks of October. I mean, on the left, look how warm it has been across the north central US for the first half of October. I mean, when we see double-digit departures above normal, you're talking about likely a top 10 scenario of warmth for the first 2 weeks of October. And you can see on the right, that's Missouri showing how we're running anywhere from 06 to as much as 10 degrees above normal in the northeast part of the state. So if you think it's been warm or unusually mild, you have to go back almost 50 years, back to the first 2 weeks of October in 1963 to find a warmer first half of October. So indeed, we have seen some unusual warmth. And, you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing because we were dry and warm in September. And these very warm conditions, of course, translates to warm soil temperatures. And fortunately, what has changed, most areas of the state, as Jim had mentioned, we've been seeing some good rains and some badly needed rainfall across parts of the state. Much of the area prior to these rain events was experiencing abnormally dry to even moderate drought conditions. And boy, the pattern has changed in regard to precipitation. We've had some great events, especially over the past 24 hours across Southwest Missouri. These are radar estimates for the first 2 weeks of October, and anything in yellow is 2 or more inches of rain. And so we even see the browns and the reds we're talking 3 to over 5 inches of rain. You know, that's above average for the entire month of October. So these warm and wet conditions have really helped in regard to, you know, renewing the grass growth, things getting greener, and, you know, starting to recharge some of that topsoil layer as well as the surface water supply. So hopefully you get a little boost in the ponds with this rainfall. It's nice because you start to recharge that soil profile, and, you know, as we go into the fall and winter season, evaporative demand is much less, and so it's a good time or a good opportunity to get our water supplies above and below the ground at capacity. And in the lower left, these are the folks in actual rain gauge reports. You can see some of these high totals, especially across southern southwestern Missouri, some of these big totals in excess of 5 inches. Many southwestern counties where the rain was badly needed, they got it. I don't want to forget, though, you know, Missouri is a big state, and there's some areas that actually have been missing out on these rain events, especially here in East Central, right around the St. Louis area and southwest of St. Louis, parts of Franklin County and Crawford and Dent County, some dry areas in south of St. Louis around in Jefferson and St. Genevieve County. And you can see some areas have seen less than an inch in these drier locations. So we still need some rain. And I think today and tonight and into tomorrow, there might be some good opportunities to help out these drier areas in getting a little bit more rainfall. Well, current conditions on this is from the Missouri Mesonet. We have several stations that report near real-time conditions. And from about 10 minutes ago on the upper left, these are the current conditions. Still running quite mild here for the middle part of October. Generally, average highs this time of year are in the mid 60s. And so right at around noontime, we're running that along that, right around that, much warmer in southeast Missouri where that frontal boundary is sort of hung up. It hasn't moved through the southeastern and southern parts of the state. We see warmer temperatures, a little bit more cloud cover in east central Missouri with some showers moving through. The sun has come out across the northwestern third of the state, and so these temperatures have rebounded quite nicely. On the upper right, this is dew point temperatures. That gives a pretty good indication of where that frontal boundary is. Much warmer, moisture conditions across southeast Missouri. We still have dew points in the mid 60s, even lower 70s. That's very unusual for this time of year to see dew points that high. But drier conditions across much of the northern part of the state where dew points are generally in the upper 30s, lower 40s. Very pleasant fall-like conditions right now across much of northern west central Missouri. Lower left, we do have that frontal boundary that I talked about, which is hung up across southern Missouri. That front's not going to move much over the next 24 hours. The forecasters are indicating a low pressure wave to move along that front and trigger additional shower and thunderstorm activity starting late today across southern Missouri and then spread it across parts of central northeast Missouri as we go into tonight and tomorrow. A very cool day tomorrow with these cloudy, rainy conditions. We'll be struggling to get out of the upper 50s north of the frontal boundary tomorrow. So somewhat of a classic fall, cloudy, rainy day. But that system will eventually move out by Friday, and it looks like just an incredibly beautiful fall-like weather weekend in shape. And we really haven't seen that with near the summer-like conditions over the past couple of weeks. But look at these highs on Saturday and Sunday, just in the lower to middle 60s. On Saturday, a little bit warmer, upper 60s, low 70s. And these low temperatures, we haven't seen low temperatures since last spring, anywhere from the upper 30s to the middle to upper 40s. So very fall, classic-like weather, a beautiful weekend shaping up. This is the forecast of precipitation over the next 2 days. It does look like this is a best shot of additional precipitation, additional rainfall will be over the next 36 hours or so. And you can see it looks like southeastern half of the state has the highest likelihood of heavier precip, anywhere from a half to 1 inch, even a little bit area of a 1.5 inch contour. So it's nice to see, these are some dry areas here in east central Missouri. It looks like they have the highest likelihood of receiving the heaviest precipitation over the next 36 hours. And the forecast for next week, it looks like this really unusually mild weather. It's sticking around. Of course, more seasonable like weather this weekend, but the forecast is indicating those temperatures to rebound as we go into next week. This is a forecast for the 19th to the 23rd. So that puts us into the third week of October. And you can see these shades of reds and oranges are the enhanced likelihood of above normal temperatures. So wouldn't be surprised to see more temperatures generally in the upper 60s, maybe lower 70s for next week. Just some very nice weather here in October, middle part of October. It looks like a drier pattern setting up on the right. So warmer conditions next week as well as drier conditions. These browns are indicative of an enhanced likelihood of below normal precipitation. Wetter conditions look like along the west coast, parts of Texas and Florida, but much the rest of the country, it looks like drier conditions will prevail. And the last slide, I just want to show the average dates. October is the month where we typically see our first fall freeze here in Missouri. These are the median dates we would anticipate to see our first fall freeze. And again, we're already into the October 14th, and we've seen no frost or freezing conditions so far this fall. And typically already by this time of year, we would see parts of those far northern counties would be experiencing those freezing temperatures, and we just haven't seen it with this warm weather. But this provides a pretty good idea of when we would anticipate our median date. I don't really see any freezing weather, at least over the next week or so. So that'll put us well into the third week of October, approaching for much of the state, the median date of seeing our first fall freeze. But there's a lot more information on this website for these frost freeze probabilities. I put the web link at the bottom. You can look at different temperature thresholds, 32 degrees, 28 degrees, 24 degrees. But I just wanted to make sure and show that since we're right in the heart of October, and we would anticipate our first fall freeze to occur. Jim, that's pretty much a weather report. I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you so much.
Again, thank you very much, Pat, for doing that. Great job each week or each month doing that, and each week during the regular time of the year. Any questions for Mr. Guinan?
Real fast, if I could jump in.
Yes.
Pat, I was wondering about harvest conditions. Really, that doesn't look very, very favorable moving forward in the short term.
No, it doesn't. You're right about that. We needed the rain, but it's also been quite challenging for producers to get in the field and finish harvest. But with this rain event over the next 24 to 36 hours, though, that's mostly impacting the southeastern half of the state. I do see some drying opportunities, especially as you go north and west through Missouri, at least for as we go into tomorrow into the weekend. And they are indicating some drying opportunities with above normal temperatures and below normal precip for much of next week.
Any other questions at this time for Pat? Pat, this is Jim. I have one. What are you seeing with some of this warm weather off the coast and stuff? I mean, is it shaping up for one way or the other going into fall and winter? Okay, we'll move forward. We have a question of the week this week, and I reached out to Dr. Bailey about this. And Eric, I hope you're on. Eric, are you available?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. The question was, are there any digestive concerns with grazing forage radishes that are lush? This question came to me. I've got some producers that's got some really phenomenal cover crops that are predominantly just forage radishes, and just wanted to throw that out to you.
Thanks, Jim, and hello, everybody. Good to be here with you all again. The first thing I think of when I come to grazing cover crops is that, oftentimes for most of our beef cattle, that's going to be a significant increase in forage quality relative to whatever they were consuming before. So the first thing you want to do when you're going onto a cover crop field or something along these lines is you don't want to turn cattle out there hungry, because it's such a dramatic shift in diet. Ideally, what you would do is, basically get their bellies full of dry hay or something along those lines, turn those cattle out onto the forage or onto the cover crops, late in the afternoon when they've already grazed. Basically just kind of try and help them adapt a little bit. Now, in general, when we get into cover crops, high quality cover crops and abundant feed, the moisture content of those feeds is extremely high. And so, I would expect these cover crops are probably they're probably over 80% moisture and under 20% dry matter at this point. And so, some folks will recommend in a case like that to keep dry hay out, to just keep keep them from getting too loose. I am not one of those guys, though, because Gerald Horn did some research with wheat pasture in Oklahoma back in the 80s. And anytime he added dry hay to lush vegetative wheat pasture forage, the performance of the stocker cattle that they were grazing on it went down. So, in my opinion, based on those data, a lot of folks do add dry hay to, cattle grazing cover crops or really lush vegetative forages, more to make themselves feel better about the cows not being really loose, more so than it does help the animals out. Now, if I'm trying to grow calves, I'm especially want to not put dry hay out, just because I don't want their performance to suffer anyway. If they're dry brood cows, that probably don't need to gain weight anyway, then maybe that's a case where the dry hay is not quite as bad of a deal. Brassicas, like radishes in general, they tend to have some iodine antagonism in terms of mineral content. So you want to make sure that there is you've got a mineral program in place, that they're eating the mineral that you're putting out, and the mineral has iodine in it, just so that we don't run into any kind of thyroid or iodine deficiencies. So other than that, those are pretty much the main things. Adapt them gradually to the new feed, and make sure you've got iodine out in your mineral. So Jim, that's all I've got.
Anybody have any questions for Dr. Bailey? Also in the chat, if you didn't see, Pat put some references in there on the question that I asked. So, so we'll move on. Next up, I'm going to turn this over to Jill Scheit, and she's going to introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, our next speaker is Mark Green. He's retired NRCS down here in Southwest Missouri, and he worked in Greene County, and we're really glad that he was down here in Southwest Missouri with us. He's great on fencing and anything and everything grazing school. He was an excellent speaker and has a lot of knowledge. So we're really excited that he's with the ACES program with NRCS. And today he's going to talk about fencing and water challenges of grazing cover crops. So Mark, if you want to go ahead and share screen, we can get you started.
Okay, we'll see if we can get this working. Is that working?
Looks good.
Okay, I have to confess, till about 10 minutes ago, I had cover crops on my mind. I'm gonna blame it on Eric. And then I realized you asked me about crop residues. So, but a lot of what I got to say is still going to be very applicable, and I'm going to add a few comments of things to think about. Bottom line is we need to sure think about strip grazing, whether it's crop residue, whether it's cover crops. You know, anytime we can do that strip grazing, we're going to not give them more than 3 days worth. Less would be better. We're going to increase our grazing utilization. We're going to increase animal intake. We're going to decrease that selectivity, actually preserve the quality of the forage better because they're wasting less, stomping on less. We're giving them fresh feed more often. And the other thing to think about on these crops is we're going to reduce the time they're in one area, which potentially is going to help us reduce those mud issues and tromping issues. Plus, with any of this grazing, it's huge how much it helps on manure distribution. Let those animals spread that manure out for us so we don't have it spread all over the place. This is just a table we use all the time talking about the utilization, and I'm just going to refer to the far right on that dormant season. If we can move them more like once a day, we can really improve our utilization. In other words, how much we're getting in their belly. If we only move them about once a week, we're getting less than half of that utilization out of what's available out there. So I'd always consider that on your grazing. But on the fence itself, I guess I got to thinking there's two sides to this, and it's on the crop field that I wasn't thinking about earlier that I want to add right up front. You may not have a property boundary fence. I've heard of that. I got to confess, I don't work in cropland country, but I've heard of that quite often as a limiting factor. Well, the option could be to come in there even with polywire, but if I did, I would put probably 3 or 4 wires up in a good hot charger. And at least you could put it up for that grazing season and then take it back down. But we want to think about how we're powering that. And there's basically 2 ways you're going to be powered. If you've already got electric fence on your place, of course, you're going to have a permanent charger and some permanent electric fence that you can power off of. If you don't, there's very good options on some portable chargers. The other thing I'd strongly consider, if it's an area where maybe I'm going to do this more often, is install a good charger and put a good electric offset wire along an existing fence so you can hook your polywire to that. Also keeps them off of that fence. But if you do consider that, make sure you use these type of offset brackets. They're the only ones I'd ever recommend or ever use. They're good, high quality, and they keep that electric wire out away from that fence. I'd totally avoid these types. They're low quality. You're right next to your fence that grounds out, and it'll give you nothing but problems. The other side of it is these portable chargers. The solar type are out there with a battery. They're made to just charge that polywire, that reel of polywire. They're lower joules, so they're only made for that, not a permanent system. I use them a lot, even in my situation. And then these D-cell battery chargers. I wouldn't have guessed it, but I started using one. They take 8 D-cell batteries and work well. That charger will last about a month, keeping that polywire hot. So it's something to consider. The polywire itself, if you're not familiar with it, basically it's poly rope with strands of wire in it, 3, 6, 9 strands of wire. And some of you have heard me say it's like 3 strikes you're out, 6 strikes you're out, or 9 strikes you're out. I only use 9-strand wire because those little wires are going to break and I want it to last me better. Plus, any of the 3-strand I've ever seen is not good quality anyway. And I'd always stick with white. Like on those reels over there, that red reel, you can't see that red wire against your grass, or it's very hard to see. And then don't skimp on your reels, basically geared, non-geared. If you're rolling and unrolling 1/4 mile of wire, you're going to want that geared reel. It means every turn of the handle, there's 3 turns of the reel. And the non-geared, I've never seen them that are very good quality, and they just don't hold up. Your portable posts, basically 2 types, your plastic and your steel pigtails. The main thing I'd say on the pigtails is totally avoid the red ones. There's some that have the red plastic covering and the sun will just destroy them. Little side note there is Jim's heard me say it's only good use I've found for a golf bag. Works really good to haul posts. I stole that from a friend of mine in northern Missouri. But on these plastic posts, 3 things I look at. I want a large step, I want a small steel spike, and I want a hook type wire holder like that white right in the middle there. All those down on the lower right, I wouldn't use. They're just too big a spike, and they'll give you frozen ground, rocky ground, they'll give you fits. And totally avoid these rebar posts. They just give you fits. They may be cheaper, but really good chance of ground out and everything else. Another thing to consider on some maybe grazing some of this cropland is these bat latches. They have a timer on them. You can set some out ahead of time. Cows will get used to hearing that beep, and that thing will actually let loose itself and open that gate will fly back. Cows learn to move themselves, and I've known some guys grazing cover crops that use these. They're not cheap, but they're pretty interesting, worth looking at if you're moving fairly often. From the water side, of course, I was looking at this maybe from the cover crop side more. Are we growing it grazing it during the growing season or during the winter grazing? And of course, if we're going to do the grazing it in winter grazing, you're definitely going to have some winter water. And as we all know, water's always the limiting part, but at least in the winter, we could start up by their water source and strip graze away from that water source and not have to worry about a back wire, especially on crop residue. We definitely don't have to worry about a back wire. The other thing I'd mention is if you happen to have an area where a site where you might have more than one tank site, alternate those or move, don't let them just go to that one tank all winter long, and you can help rest those tank areas and give them a little bit of recovery. During the growing season, which 9 months out of the year, maybe 10 months out of the year, I sure would look at this above ground pipe, quick couplers, lay them in the fence line, portable tanks that you can move along with them, no matter if we're grazing grass or we're grazing crop residue or we're grazing cover crops. We could put that water right out there amongst them. But if you're going to set that tank up that way, get a 3/4 inch or 1 inch full flow valve. Do not try to set them up with these guys. The tank will be empty most of the time. These have such a slow flow. They're not made to put on the small tanks. And I just totally avoid them. And make them portable. Move them with those strips so you can move them right there with the cattle. So during the dormant time, just move away from your water with that poly wire, and don't even have to worry about a back wire because we don't have that regrowth to worry about, or on crop residue, we definitely don't. During the growing season, we do need to set up a back wire, and then also think about setting up several wires ahead of time. Then all you got to do is move them along there with your water if you've got portable water, and you might not have to move those wires every 4, 5, 6 days, and not every day. It's a way to set it up ahead of time. We do this on bale grazing too, and it works great. So I think considering all those things, using poly wire, bottom line is figuring out how to strip graze it. You're going to get the best use out of whatever you're using, and trying to figure out how to move your water most of the time. I know some guys have been using this portable water for years, say they can get down to about 26 degrees without much problem. So that's what I got. I hope that helps some.
Mark, thank you very much. Great presentation. And for any of you that don't know Mark, he's a great resource. And if you do have questions, please reach out. That's the time we have now. If you got any questions, please bring them forward.
This is Valerie Tate. I want to come to the defense of a non-geared reel. Personally, I don't have enough forearm strength to carry that comfortably. For that geared reel is heavier and it is harder to crank. And if I have to crank a geared reel for even half a quarter of a mile, I can't do it without stopping to rest, because my forearms just are not strong enough to carry that. So if you're going to have your kids moving them, or someone who doesn't have the strength in their forearms, those non-geared reels are actually more comfortable for me. I can turn it as fast as I can walk, so it doesn't bother me to crank it, but carrying it becomes an issue for me.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Valerie. You caught me on that once before, and I need to correct that, because you're right. My wife hollers about that too. It's a really good point.
Hey, Mark, it's Eric. How are you?
Pardon me?
Hey, it's Eric. How are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Hey, sorry for the mix-up on the advertising thing.
Oh,
So, hey, I had a quick question about joules and chargers, for fields like this. Are the are the labels, the mileage estimates that they give in the stores with the various chargers, are those accurate, or is there another kind of rule of thumb or something we should be looking at when we're trying to select a charger for, some temporary fencing like this?
Definitely good question, because that drives me nuts about the industry. There'll be a charger that'll say it'll power so many miles of fence or so many acres. Well, is that one wire? Is that 3 wires? How do they know how many fences I'm going to put on those acres? So stick with joules. And we've had a rule of thumb always that you want a minimum of 1 joule per mile of wire. I tend to cut that in half, and 1 joule per half a mile of wire. So these portable chargers, for the most part, there's none of them over 1 joule. They're meant just to power that poly wire, because you might be running a quarter mile of that. So that's a great question, and really look into the joules, output joules.
I got another charger question. So there's some folks that are starting to build their own kind of solar chargers. So they'll buy a charger at the store, but then they're buying their solar panels on Amazon or something along those lines and kind of setting up their own system. Have you seen very many folks do that, and do they work pretty well, or are they making extra work relative to saving just a little bit of money?
No, that's if I've got it. I'll back up a minute. The most reliable source is always going to be a 110 charger, a charger plugged into my 110 outlet in my barn, or somewhere. And even if I've got to run an offset wire a quarter mile out to my system, I'd rather have one that's plugged in. That being said, if I'm on a remote site where my only option is solar, that's the best way to do it, because you can buy a battery charger that's going to be higher joules. You'll need a deep marine cell battery to hold up good, and then size a panel to keep that battery charged. Now I'm no good at I couldn't tell you how to size a panel. I haven't kept up on that, but we've had some set up several years that way, and that will work. But these solar all one piece are not meant to do the whole system.
Mark, we've got a question in the chat. How important is grounding the portable chargers?
Good question. Because we talk about grounding a lot. Normally we say 90% of the problem with electric fence is poor grounding. But on your portable situation, you still need to figure out a way to ground it. But you're only talking now about maybe you've got a quarter mile of polywire run out there from that charger. So I've even used one of those pigtail step-in posts just for the ground for that. Because now you're not talking a huge distance or anything. Or if I'm hanging it on my barbed wire fence, I might hook it on my barbed wire fence for ground, just for that temporary situation. Understanding problem with hooking it on a T-post, you either got thick paint or rust. So you kind of got to deal with that. But it's not as big an issue just because we're talking about very small lengths and area compared to your whole grazing system.
Mark, this is Jim. Heard anything with supply chain issues with getting stuff, whether it be chargers, fence posts, anything like that?
Yes, just like everything got messed up. I was talking with the PowerFlex guy last week, and he's been ordering stuff ahead of time, trying to get ahead of it. And I don't know if anybody's looked, but like the 12.5 gauge wire has probably increased in price, 20, 30% since last year. So it's an issue right now. I'm like anybody else. I have no idea when it's going to settle down. But if you find a decent price on some of it, I'd probably go for it. They've got it, but it's more of an issue than we used to run into.
Any more questions for Mark?
There's no questions in the chat at the moment.
Thank you, Ms. Jill. Mark, thank you very much for being on. Really always enjoy your presentations, and your question and answer sessions are always excellent. So thank you very much.
Appreciate that.
So Pat, Guinan, are you still happen to be on? Well, for everybody, Pat did put a couple of resources in the chat box for us with regards to some of the longer term outlook on the weather, the question I asked. So they're there for you to look at if you'd like. Again, remember, our Forage Livestock Town Halls are being recorded. There also are several that are out there on the MUIPM YouTube channel that you can go look at any time or pass along to producers or others that you know may have an interest. So hopefully you'll use that resource if you need it or know somebody that does. So it's a great, great resource out there. That's all I have for this week. Does anybody else have anything they want to bring to the group or the town hall committee? If hearing none, I think we'll call this October Forage Livestock Town Hall complete today. Again, thank you all for participating. Hope you all have a great afternoon and enjoy some of this wonderful fall weather we're having. Thank you.